servants and an audience joining us from all around the world today. So good morning, good evening or good afternoon from wherever you are at the moment. And welcome to this webinar on how fintech solutions can help governments to tackle fraud, error and debt. I'm Siobhan Benita, I'm a former UK civil servant and I'm chairing this webinar on behalf of the publishing house Global Government Forum and its sister publication Global Government Fintech. And I'd also like to thank our knowledge partner today, MasterCard. Now, in terms of today's topic, even before the pandemic, governments around the world were transforming the way they worked in this area, using new technologies and digital solutions to tackle issues relating to fraud, error and debt. But the past 18 months has really shone a light on the scale of the problem, and COVID-19 will have cost governments billions in procurement fraud, false claims and incorrect grant applications. In this Global Government FinTech webinar, we're seeking to tackle questions such as what is the scale of fraud and error in the public sector? Where are the opportunities for the public sector to use FinTech solutions to tackle the problem? Civil servants are increasingly turning to FinTech solutions to identify and prevent corrupt and inaccurate practices in public procurement and other areas. Everything from better management of data to use of automation or blockchain technology to increase transparency, improve security, and drive out potential for fraud and errors. And we're going to talk about all of those issues with our fantastic panel, who I'll introduce in a moment. But this is also to say there'll be an opportunity for you, our audience, to put your questions to our panel members. So you should have, whichever device you're using, at the bottom of your screens, a Q&A function. Please, at any moment from this time onwards, use that Q&A function to message in your questions, and we'll get through as many of those as we can once we've heard from our great panel. So without further ado, let me introduce our panel. First, we will hear from Ivana Gordon, who is head of the Grants Expert Services here in the Cabinet Office in the UK, where she provides expert support to officials managing grant schemes, including using digital tools to increase impact and effectiveness and to reduce risk and errors. Ivana has over 20 years experience in policy, operational and strategic roles, helping civil service transformation and supporting officials to focus on user-led design, to harness data and analytics and to drive through efficiencies. Then we will hear from Olga Labelle, who is Vice President of Government Engagement for MasterCard USA. And in this role, Olga identifies opportunities for MasterCard to partner with the public sector on key strategic topics, including financial inclusion, economic development, supporting small and medium enterprises, and supporting economic recovery of key sectors. And before joining MasterCard, Olga was at Boston Consulting Group, focusing on public sector, social impact and education, and helping organizations to use social and environmental needs as a lens for strategic growth. We will then hear from Juha Kusala, who is National VAT Anti-Fraud Coordinator at the Finnish Tax Administration. Juha has more than 20 years experience in tax and anti-fraud operations. And in his current role, his anti-fraud team has developed a real-time risk analysis system based on data analysis that scans businesses on a constant basis to uncover uncompliant players. Furthermore, to react effectively to international fraudulent financial behaviour, Juha has been integral in a groundbreaking collaboration between Finland and Estonia, which we'll hear more about in our presentations. And talking of Estonia, last but not least, we'll hear from Martin Caro, who is Deputy Director General at the State Shared Service Centre in the Ministry of Finance in Estonia. For almost 4 years, Martin has been leading a transformation in the grants area, consolidating several different agencies under one roof. The outcome has been one window solution for the customer, with higher customer satisfaction and leaner grants area set up for the state, with better management of the funds and increased efficiency. And we'll hear all about that from Martin in his presentation. So I'm sure you agree, we've got a stellar panel. Please do use this opportunity to pick their brains, send in your questions at any point. But without further ado, I'm going to go over to Ivana and ask her to give us the opening presentation. Over to you. You've got to take yourself off mute. I should have.
And there we go. You reminded me just
Right.
before we
We have to
started, and
say it
I did
once.
the classic mistake. But thank you very much, Yvonne. And thank you very much, everyone, for having me here today. As Yvonne said, my name's Ivana Gordon. I lead expert services in the grants management function at Cabinet Office, and also our COVID-19 response since the pandemic started. So I'm going to give you a very quick introduction into a bit of a landscape view around fraud in the UK government, what we've been doing in grants specifically, and some of the opportunities that we are looking to in helping tackle fraud through harnessing fintech solutions. So if we could go to the first slide, please. So the response to fraud across the UK is fragmented and complex. It continues to be an under-resourced area across the public sector, and it's a hidden crime. You have to deploy skilled people and specific tools and techniques to find it. In an emergency circumstances, experience tells us that the threat from fraud and the likelihood of irregular payments increases. In 2020, RUSI reports stated that fraud against UK citizens, businesses, and the UK public has reached epidemic levels. Indeed, the pandemic has led to unprecedented challenges, with risks and instances of fraud increasing across the system as fraudsters have quickly responded to take advantage. We saw, for example, high levels of identity fraud through personal information harvesting for applications of stimulus packages and grant relief funds, dominating malicious campaigns in 2020. The government counter fraud function estimates that fraud loss was between 5 billion and 18 billion last year as a result of the pandemic. But this could be very conservative, and we won't really know the extent of fraud and error loss for several years to come yet. The key to dealing with fraud is a cross-system collaboration, and the ability to access the right tools and systems is key to this. We have seen the value in the join-up across systems during our C19 work to measure and respond to fraud losses. We have invested in the better use of data and analytics, including harnessing legislation to enable data sharing. This has also included debt data sharing pilots that have been looking to prevent debts and improve collections. We've also been doing some innovation pilots with fintech, exploring entity resolution, for example, to try and build a single view of a company or individual, and harnessing analytics to find the connections and trends and risks, for example, linking, for example, linking a conviction for drugs to an account with a bounce back loan, and then looking at the wider network of companies that also got bounce backs. If we could move to the next slide, I'll talk to you a little bit more about the world of grants, which I am most familiar with. So grants are a real key funding instrument for governments, and they represent around 13% of all government's annual spending. Around a third goes to businesses, citizens, and the third sector. The grants function has, over recent years, looked at the levels of risk under existing grant-making arrangements. And in particular, we found a systemic weakness was the use of technology and data. Grants have really been bypassed by digital transformation over recent decades. And there was a really low level of digital capability, with a large proportion of grant schemes relying on manual processes. So we identified opportunities to build digital platforms once at the centre, improving our data and its use to drive efficiency and effectiveness and better outcomes of grant spend to the UK economy and society. Firstly, we looked at the area of due diligence and how we could automate applicant assessment to detect, prevent, and predict fraud and other emerging risks. Our digital tool Spotlight that we have built has enabled data-led decision-making, performing checks from financial viability to ownership structures, bank verification, and even plagiarism. We can now process over 10,000 applications in minutes, rather than spending 2 to 3 hours per applicant on the most basic due diligence checks. When we were just about to launch Spotlight, we were then hit by the pandemic. Grants were thrust to the forefront of the government measures to help support the nation, providing essential funding, and our spend increased last year by over 400%. Prevention of fraud and economic crime in grants due diligence is an arms race against criminals who are diversifying and taking advantage of COVID-19. Spotlight proved instrumental in supporting our COVID response. It has helped risk assess billions worth of grants and has consistently helped identify and prevent millions of payment irregularities, helping safeguard grant funding and fight against economic crime, and as I said, which is ever diversifying. We are also now focused on using the tool to spot potential irregularities post-award and identifying fraud and error that may be recovered. If we could go to the next slide, please. So just talking a little bit more about the future and other innovative things that we did. We really made use of the lockdown last year and we ran a virtual hackathon. Our innovation jam helped identify and show us how new technologies and increased collaboration between government and the private sector may be harnessed in the fight against fraud. We brought together vendors from across financial service sector to demonstrate their experience in areas such as big data analytics, social network analytics, sentiment analysis, and supervised machine learning, just to mention a few. But we have only just begun to harness government information, and we are working to incorporate wider data sharing, such as tax, debt, police data, and even exploring counterterrorism intelligence. We are also exploring wider partnerships to extend our reach to international. We're currently working with the MOD and the FCDO and the Bank of England, as well as exploring what else we can learn and collaborate on with financial services. We recognise that with big data comes big opportunities, and the grants function has key learnings and new typologies from our work from last year. We know that our digital solutions are set to harness artificial intelligence, such as machine learning and predictive analytics. And we aim to catalyse the use of AI across UK government and further improve the effectiveness and efficiency of grant management. And we really look forward to exploring the opportunities of what other fintech solutions can bring to our journey and roadmap to developing these digital solutions and collaboration going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ivana. That's such a great way to set the scene with that presentation. I think you've raised some of the issues that I think the audience and our other panel members will be interested in. So just setting out the scale of the issue there and why this is so important, really quite amazing to see some of those figures there that you mentioned, 5 to 18 billion just in the UK alone, and that's a conservative kind of estimate. A lot of focus there on the importance of sharing data and the benefits that you can have from that. You know, improving speed, the huge savings that can be achieved, and then really looking to the future in that this is just the start. So, as you said, more potential there in terms of not just collaborating more with other sectors, but collaborating better across government. There's still lots more to be done there. And then international collaboration, which I think we will hear more of from some of our other panel members as well. And then looking forward to other things like AI and automation. So really good way to set the scene. Thank you so much. I'm now going to ask Olga for her presentation.
Great. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure to be part of this virtual gathering with you all. So I want to start off with just a couple of ground setting definitions. First, who is MasterCard and why is a credit card company talking about fraud solutions for governments? So Apple is not just a fruit. Amazon is not just a river. MasterCard is not just a credit card company. We're a technology company with global payment and data networks that have been rooted in privacy for the last 55 years. In the last 18 months alone, we've worked with governments in over 55 countries on over 200 initiatives to digitize and efficiently deliver vital services to millions of people. We spend a lot of our time looking at the intersection of payments, fraud, data, privacy, and security. The second definition I wanted to talk about is what exactly is fintech? It's a word that is shrouded in mystery and can sound intimidating, but for sure it stands for financial technology, and it really can refer to any technology that improves, streamlines, digitizes, or disrupts traditional financial services. So when I talk about fintech, it can be anything from sort of basic fintech platforms that enable tasks like depositing checks, moving money across accounts, or paying bills, to the most complex and intricate concepts like cryptocurrency or peer-to-peer lending. And in particular, I want to talk about two areas where fintech solutions from the private sector can help reduce fraud in governments, and that's around public procurement and social disbursements. So public procurement, one of the largest areas of government spending, as you all know, as much as 12 to 18% of GDP for many countries. And anytime there is that much money flowing around, there is always a risk of fraud. Understandably, many governments have built processes and checkpoints to review spending and manage how that money is being spent and manage the fraud. But here's the downside. Adding all those manual checks and processes is very expensive and time consuming, meaning that instead of using the best of taxpayer dollars to buy the actual goods that are needed, or to stimulate inclusion of small businesses or women or minority businesses, governments are spending millions of dollars just managing the payments and trying to reduce the fraud. And it turns out often those traditional and paper-based means of procurement, like using purchase orders, invoices, manual reconciliation, are not only time intensive, but also prone to risk and error. On the flip side, if you're a business, particularly a small business, you often have to wait 90, 120 days to get paid, which means that in effect, many small businesses just can't bid on government contracts because they can't be out of working capital for that long. In the EU, I believe the government's had a goal of 50% of procurements going to small businesses from governments, and not a single country has met that mark. So with fintech solutions, governments can use algorithms to reduce fraud while eliminating those manual processes. We can set limits on when purchases are made, by whom, to which merchants, and then we can use AI to detect and immediately flag any irregular activity so that it can be stopped. In some cases, we have sophisticated tools that can immediately match an invoice with a payment as soon as the goods are received. So rather than waiting 3 to 4 months, a small business or a supplier can be paid right away. And what was really interesting to us, especially during the COVID crisis, is that using digital financial tools allowed governments to have an active risk framework, meaning they could focus on either reducing fraud and increasing controls, or they can open up some of those controls when speed is the most important thing. And I'll give the example of the Crown Commercial Services in the UK. During the pandemic, the UK, like many other governments, needed to quickly and efficiently procure a whole host of different equipment that governments weren't used to procuring, things like PPE. It needed to ensure that its suppliers, many of which were small businesses, had the working capital to maintain their cash flow. And unfortunately, it needed to compete with other governments as the whole world was out trying to buy protective equipment and other devices. So to balance the urgency and the risk, the government was able to raise transaction and spending limits for authorized cardholders and extend allowable categories of spend, which allowed them to procure services much more quickly while ensuring timely payments to suppliers and making sure that they could get what they needed to support the country. The second category I want to talk about is social benefits disbursements. And when I talk about that, I mean governments paying money to support parts of the population, like vulnerable citizens or small businesses. And this can be everything from large and established programs like pension disbursements to emergency relief payments like unemployment insurance or relief after a major natural disaster. Now, the challenge with fraud that we see are twofold. One is you need to make sure that eligible people sign up and ineligible people do not. So essentially, you need to make sure that the registration is accurate for the recipients. And this often needs to happen fast, particularly after a major disaster or in the wake of a global pandemic. The second challenge is that you need to make sure that the government money is going to the right places. So if someone is getting unemployment insurance because they need it to pay rent, you want to make sure that they're not taking that check and cashing it in at a casino. So let me highlight a couple of examples of how we work to control fraud for social disbursements during the pandemic. The first is from my country of the US, where the challenge with COVID relief payments was that they needed to be distributed fast to people and businesses in need. Overnight, people were out of work, disconnected from their support systems. They needed to pay rent, buy groceries, buy medicine. The issue of speed came up again and again and again. Fintech solutions could be used to help people get paid much faster, rather than waiting for weeks or months. to receive a relief check from the government, they could receive it within days as a direct deposit to their bank account or onto a prepaid card if they don't have a bank account. Now, we think of speed and fraud as having an inverse relationship. The faster you get payments out, the more fraud there will be. But in the US, we actually saw the opposite. So not only did the use of digital payments reduce speed, they also reduced fraud. In states that use checks for government disbursements, we estimate that the government paid out $63 billion in fraudulent claims, that the checks went to the wrong people or were cashed by the wrong people or went to the wrong address. Comparatively, with a digital payment solution, the government could ensure that the intended recipient was the one that actually received the benefit. And they could also get transparency and data that the money was being spent indeed at grocery stores and pharmacies rather than gambling centers. This was also something that we saw in Thailand, where the challenge was making relief payments to the right people came up again and again. The Thai government initiated a stimulus program to electronically distribute relief payments of 117 billion baht to businesses and citizens impacted by COVID-19. Claimants had to sign up on a website and provide an aid application with their bank account. Now, MasterCard provided its vocaling software and services solutions in this case to help the government securely and privately cross-check the names of those aid applicants with other pieces of identifying information, like their national ID or mobile number. That allowed them to verify that the bank accounts where those disbursements were going were indeed matched to the registered recipient, and that indeed the right person was getting the stimulus check. And I'll give a final example from the UK, where the challenge was around supporting the clinically vulnerable. As the UK entered lockdowns last year, the National Health Services advised 1.5 million at-risk patients to stay at home and avoid any face-to-face contacts. Now, many of those patients were elderly and financially vulnerable. They were reliant on cash and physical purchases for things like groceries and unable to use digital banking services. So to support those patients, the NHS engaged the Royal Voluntary Service to launch an app and campaign recruiting community volunteers to help those at-risk people get their essential goods and needs. The challenge was, how do you facilitate payments for things like essential food shopping between a patient in self-isolation and a volunteer that they've never met before? Here we were able to offer a consumer prepaid solution, which enabled the patient to provide the volunteer with a prepaid card that would limit the loading of funds and the use specifically at places like grocery stores. So we had blocks on ATM withdrawals and on spend on things like gambling, which obviously is not what those stay-at-home patients needed. This was a really fantastic way to volunteer, to help the volunteers get engaged while also making sure that all of the funds were dispersed to the right individuals. So I hope those examples have given you a taste of the depth and breadth of fintech solutions for governments to help manage fraud. With that, I'll pause my comments and welcome further discussion on any of those topics during the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Olga. Definitely very helpful. I mean, you started by saying even the terminology can be confusing, I think. Really good to have your definition of what fintech is, and then to have those real solutions to see how technology has actually helped during the pandemic. And what's really interesting there, I think, is the examples that you gave in terms of how data has been used differently to target benefits to people who need it most, to increase speed and accuracy of those disbursements, to drive out fraud from the procurement. All of those absolutely crucial in the emergency period that we were in, the pandemic period we're in, but will all now have a legacy, meaning that those similar technologies can be used going forward with huge benefits for both the citizen and government. So thank you so much for that really, really useful presentation as well. I'm now going to go over to Finland and ask Juha to give us his thoughts.
Thank you. So it's my great pleasure to introduce our solution, what we have done, what we are doing, and what we will do in cooperation with Estonia and Finland to tackle, to detect, to prevent fraudulent financial activities. So my name is Juha Kuusala, responding on Finnish tax administration VAT anti-fraud function. But as saying, in cooperation with Estonia, please the next slide, the background, and then going to next one. Next, thank you. So the Finland and Estonia, we are almost like one country in a way. You can see the geographical position of ours. So we are neighboring countries. We do have a really active business life within the countries. Fortunately, mostly in good, but sometimes the fraudulent players, actors, and companies, they are finding the way to misuse the system, misuse the tax systems, VAT systems within the Europe. So sometimes there are some issues done in bad faith. So that is why, next slide, please. That is why our prime ministers of Estonia and Finland, they agreed on 2016 the roadmap regarding the data exchange and digital services between the countries. One of the reasons was that we should have ensure our tax base. We should tackle the frauds to save our treasury. So what they agreed was the exchange information in real time regarding business register, population register data, tax information, and what is maybe not in the focus today, digital prescriptions. But that is the first step we made based on the political agreement. Please, the next one. And objectives are following the next one. Thank you. So in the audience, we all face constantly new environment. And I mean the globalization, digitalization. So not only compliant businesses, compliant individuals are using these good things and this progress, but also the fraudulent players are misusing the systems. So then we are facing in the anti-fraud business, anti-fraud function, we are facing new needs, we are facing new challenges. And that's why, as I said, we are trying to ensure treasury and tax base in Estonia and Finland in a following way. I will show you. Please, the next one. So what we did, because all we know that time is money. Time is money also in anti-fraud function. So not in the old days, we were waiting for responses of request of tax data from other country, 1 day, 2 days, 1 week, maybe, sometimes even longer. That's not good in nowadays. So what we did, we created real-time connection within Estonia and Finland. So when I push the button in Finland to request Estonian database information, I get the response in a few seconds, really in a few seconds, not waiting for 1 day, 2 days, or 1 week, or 1 month. So that is the main goal. If we do have ongoing investigation any control measure, registration issue. So we do not have to wait. We do have the response. We do have the data, tax data in few seconds. And what is something I would like to highlight is that Finland and Estonia, we do not have a common IT architecture. That is not needed if you are considering in your countries to have similar kind of cooperation. No common IT is not needed. Just the technical connection, it could be created without common IT. Please, the next one. Scope and the services, please. So not going into details, but the point is, whatever is the tax information to tackle, to detect, to prevent anti-fraud activities, whether it's tax debt, whether it's salary, VAT, employer, employee, and employer duties. So we can, in both ways, request the information at the moment. So you can see here the steps from 2000. Sorry, it's my mistake. 2020 should be 2020 December to this day, November 2021. So we have taken a few steps, and some services which we are calling them will be decided soon. So maybe we are not requesting only tax information like we are doing now already. We are considering to have also maybe, I say maybe, some financial criminal information, for instance, to highlight, to be aware of the criminal activities in another country. Please, the next one. Benefits, next one. They are obvious, at least these. We are doing all day analysis on the players, Finnish, Estonian companies. Without this nowadays implementation, we were in old days, we were not too quick enough to raise the suspicious companies, suspicious persons. Now we do have much more possibilities to create to detect suspicious players, and supporting investigations, supporting effective registrations, recovery, and summarizing, ensuring tax base. Please, the next. And legal base, next one is, thank you. Actually, OECD convention. What we did more is we did a little bit more with Estonia. We do have a competent authority agreement. It's like OECD convention, but we have some couple of details more. We can use the information for not only tax crimes, but for other financial purposes as well. And then going on, please. Finally, this is the very practical example on the interface. So if I push the button in Finland, I can have in a few seconds, I can have Estonian VAT information in my desktop. That is that summarize maybe our effort in very operational way. And last one, thank you. Thank you for your attention. So, and as I wrote, please remember, if you will to do something, there is a way to do something. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Juha. A real encouragement there at the end for officials to think about this, to think about the opportunities for collaboration. It builds on what Ivana said at the beginning about the potential for more international cooperation to drive out some benefits. So it's great to have this real world example of the two neighbours working together, and good to see the interface there to actually see what it looks like in real life. Loved what you said about time is money when it comes to fraud. So having that instant access to data, hugely important. And you mentioned there the benefits in terms of just the faster detection and prevention of people who are trying to play the system. And also, just before we go on to our final one, I think you've raised an issue there, because I'm sure it will come up in the questions around, you do this even if you don't have compatible IT systems. There are ways to do this. I think that's really important, and I'm sure people will be interested to hear more about that. So thank you so much, Juha, and then we will go over to the other half of that partnership. I know you're going to talk about something slightly different, though, slightly different area, but over to you, Martin. Thank you.
Hello, thank you. And always makes it feel kind and warm feeling to speak after our Finnish brothers. So my best of regards to Finland as well. Yes, my name is Martin Karro. I'm the Deputy Director General in State Shared Service Center, and I'm really happy to present you some of the headway and the progress we have done in managing the fraud. State Shared Service Center is a 7-year-old government agency. We have centralized all the public accounting, the HR accounting, public procurements, and also the grants management into one agency. Being totally IT system based as we like it here in Estonia. And now we have for past 4 years been having the state reform in the grants area. We have centralized all the European structural funds, grants area, EEA, Norway grants, and also the CO2 globalization funds, and also state budget grants here in one agency. Although we have 2 more specialized agencies left, one specialized on entrepreneurship, another on environmental topics. And we started from more than 10 specialized agencies delivering the grants, with all of them having their own IT systems for grants, or also having all in-house document handling systems. So when you wanted to have a clear view on what is happening in grants area, and also are all the risks and fraud cases covered, it was a really demanding system to make all the interfaces working and having the one clear picture what is happening. So we have been quite successful in tackling this. Now in the managing authority wise, we are responsible for like 3.6 billion euros on structural funds, and also adding up to that is recovery and resilience funds, more than 1 billion euros. So quite a huge sum of money. And what we have seen out of the changes is that you can have really well functioning IT systems, but you need also have the setup of the management system or the agencies also unified, because this gives really the prerequisites in handling the big picture. And we've seen the recent outcomes is that we have been quicker in delivering the grants to the final beneficiaries. So the medium time or average time is the 28 days in order to make the payments of the grants. So our customer promise is to be in 1 month, because this is usually the month is also for the customers the time they want to have their bills settled. And also we have seen the effect of the lowering the fraud cases, or the grants which are paid out in an incorrect manner. It's the error rate is now 0.75, which is audited, and we are feeling quite okay with this number. That this shows that our system, the inbuilt controls are functioning, and we can be relying on our info systems. Maybe some of the cases where we have seen the positive effects on centralization is, for example, one was the grants for highly need or special need employees, and where the grants were mediated by the different bodies. And it happened as there were different agencies delivering the grants. One is from the regional background, the other is for social backgrounds. There was possibility to ask for grants for the same projects several times. And now, as we have had the info systems communicating with each other, so we have decreased the number of the, or we have seen where the companies or the facilitators lie, which have had multiple finance agreements. So we have been getting the quality rate up there. And maybe also from the previous 2 years, we have operated in the crisis mode, and also, as I wanted put before, that the government has been reacted on the grants to help to ease the system. That in Estonia, also the government put quite a huge sum of money to help the tourism sector, or also the other entrepreneurs. That we have been managing to set up the grant system in 5 days after the government has made the decision who will get for what conditions the aid. So having this settled in from one house, it has been, we have been also being quite flexible and quick in delivering the grants to the companies or the persons in need. And this has been quite well welcomed also by the society. And maybe this is quick intro from my side. So I'll be happy to answer all the questions. You're on mute.
I'm going to come off my mute there. A really nice way to finish the presentations, in that you've also stressed the scale of the benefits that can be achieved by doing this. Great to have that example of how you've streamlined and centralized, going from 10 agencies down to 1 with the 2 kind of sub agencies there. And also, I think you echoed maybe what Olga was saying about using technology allows you to be much more flexible in terms of, you said that you could respond to different sectors much more quickly in terms of depending on the need of those sectors, especially post the pandemic. So thank you, all of you, so much for those presentations. Really great to set the scene in that way. We've got questions coming in, which is really good. Before we go to that, and please do keep those questions coming in from the audience, but I want to kick off the discussion just with a very simple question, really, because you've all given some great examples of where technology is being used to good effect, but you've also said that more could be done, that there's potential to do a lot more. So I just want your thoughts on, what do you think the biggest challenges are and the biggest barriers for civil servants in terms of doing more of this? So why isn't more of this being done, and what do you see as being the biggest challenges to progress in this area? Ivana, we haven't heard from you for a while, so I'm going to come back to you. What do you think the biggest challenges are going forward?
Well, I think it was like Yuka's presentation sort of suggested. I think there's a bit of a, I guess, a barrier that interoperability may be a challenge for a lot of, I guess, services that we are developing, and how they can actually lead to transformation and the benefits of that. And it's definitely something that we come across speaking to departments across the UK government in terms of breaking some of those sort of myths down, that technology really isn't the greatest barrier anymore. And actually for us, it's been more around the cultural shift that we need to do in terms of how much more we should be inventing in preventative measures. And particularly in the grant space, we're also exploring then, how you can improve and harness technology in the monitoring and evaluation stages of grant making. So I think there is a definite cultural shift that needs to happen in the way that we sort of approach sort of tackling fraud, particularly in some of these areas of funding.
When you say cultural, do you think that's a skills also issue? Do you think that some civil servants don't understand yet how technology can be applied in those different ways?
Absolutely. I mean, just to take sort of a spotlight, was the first journey that we started on. When we were speaking to users to sort of say, how do you do due diligence now? There was a huge amount of anxiety by decision makers who were basically, harnessing Google, trying to do different searches to look at sort of different risk indicators, and they weren't really understanding what to spot or how to spot it. And we really identified this gap of maturity from, you have counter fraud experts who are there as sort of second and third line defense, and then you have sort of policymakers who are trying to understand, risk assessments and that sort of counter fraud space. And actually there was an opportunity for technology there to play its role in helping them make data-led decisions, helping take away the administrative burden, and then allowing us to be able to focus on upskilling them in, okay, so what are the results actually telling you, and how can we therefore, drive your capability up to understand how combining some of those risk indicators, what that actually means to your risk appetite in administrating that funding.
Great, thanks. Martin, I saw you nodding there to some of what Ivana was saying. You've managed to do this great thing of kind of bringing together all these agencies. What were the biggest barriers you faced, and do you see those challenges in other areas of the civil service in Estonia?
Yes, and I totally hear about this, the cultural change and cultural shift is because in Estonia we took 5 years, in order to start with the project, because in order to have it centralized, most of the ministries or the policy areas, they needed to give up their direct control in their areas. So they needed to rely on central agency. And so it wasn't directly under the hand or under the management of the certain ministry. And this is the cultural effect that we are still constantly working on. That's why also in our everyday life, we have put the customer satisfaction as the really central part of our service. It's not only delivering according to the legal acts and doing what's right legally, but also doing it really well, both for the final beneficiaries and also for the policymakers. And so, and this bit by bit, I'm seeing that they can be comfortable with the service we are providing for them. And this is the main thing, because technology ways we can approach, and we can have the info systems communicating with each other, but the practice lies that in where this in the grants area, where the final beneficiary or the people in need, they will get the money, and also how the service by the state looks for the people. Is it one window? I can have it all, or I have 7 different windows and 7 different regulations and rules I need to apply. So the willingness to give up something in order to gain something bigger. So this is the biggest.
So really focusing in on the benefits to the user and what needs to be. Olga, you've worked with lots of different civil services in different countries. Do you recognize what Martin and Ivana are saying about the biggest barriers and challenges maybe to adopting some of these technologies?
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I think the other piece I would add, tied to sort of the cultural issue, is the process issue. So kind of really what we talk about digitization versus digitalization. And those are sort of actually 2 different concepts. Digitization is just using a digital tool instead of a manual tool. Digitalization is fundamentally changing the whole end-to-end process, because you're now using digital fintech solutions. And digitalization is hard because you have to start at the ground level to really get those benefits around fraud reduction, efficiencies. You have to change the way the process works end to end. So if you're still doing all those manual processes, all of those checks, you're really not going to get the benefit of a digital financial tool. You need to rethink sort of where can AI help augment the work you're doing rather than duplicate it, for example. So I think sort of really going in when I see where I see the most struggle, and this is for governments as well as private sector companies too. Anybody on the digitalization journey that's using more fintech solutions sort of has to start at the ground up and say, well, how would we re-engineer the whole way we work using these digital tools rather than just plugging them into an old existing process?
Thanks, Olga. I'm going to ask you very quickly your thoughts on these cultural kind of challenges maybe, but also there's a question that's come in specifically for you, just building on your presentation. It's asking, do you see Finland as being similar to other countries in respect to fintech solutions, or do you use kind of more advanced things like AI? So are you already using some of those things maybe that Ivana said could be used in future? Is Finland already using kind of AI routinely, for example, in your area of eliminating tax fraud?
Okay, thank you. So as I said in my presentation, so what we have done so far is one step forward. We are using the information from Estonia. We are using information from other countries, but it's only, should I say, only tax information so far. So from my idea and my unit, Finnish tax administration idea, is to enlarge the base of the exchange information. So of course, knowing the reality that tax data secrecy, but still I would like to go forward. We are in a good starting point in cooperation with Estonia, but we would like to enlarge the countries, the cooperation with other countries. We would like to enlarge the information base with other countries. So as I said to all of you, just I would like to encourage all of you, all of us, to think outside of the box.
Yeah. So it's a good progress made, but more could be done, I think.
Yes, exactly. That is my point.
Thank you. We have a question, and I knew this question would come up because lots of you have talked, and you've done it again there, Juha, about the importance of sharing data, whether that's across government departments, between government departments and the citizen, or between governments and the private sector and businesses. So the issue of sharing data, very important for progress in this area. And John Barron has asked, how do you balance data privacy requirements with increased data sharing and integration of other data sources? So this issue about privacy, and also I think trust always comes up as an issue, in particular with the citizen. Olga, this must be something, I think you're probably on the kind of front line of this, so to speak, because you do a lot, I think, directly with the citizen. What's your thoughts around that balance?
Yeah, I'm so glad this came up because I think this is really critical to the whole discussion. At MasterCard, our focus on data privacy, consumer privacy, data sharing in sort of the most secure environments is really critical. We started as a payments company, and sort of securing the privacy of individuals' payment information is one of the most paramount things. And now as we enable other data sharing, that's something that we really focus on. I want to reframe the question, because it's not about sort of data sharing in a digital environment versus no data sharing. It's data sharing digitally versus data sharing with paper and manual processes, which is much, much more insecure and much more liable to fraud and sort of other issues. So if you think about a manual way that you would collect this information, let's say for social benefits disbursement, I would get a piece of paper. I would fill it out with all of my information on a piece of paper with my name, my address, my social security number, my date of birth, my children's names, my bank account. And anybody with that piece of paper, if it's going in the mail, it can go to it can be misdelivered. If it does get to the right address, it can go to the wrong person at that address. If it gets thrown out in a waste bin, it's very easy to find. So that information is out there on paper and is very easy to exploit. Now, what we're suggesting, with a digital approach that focuses on data privacy is how can we actually look up the minimum amount of information using digital tools to enable the government to do its function while also delivering its services. So I think of this as going to a bar in the United States where you have to show your driver's license, right? And you have to show all the information on the driver's license to make sure that you are of age to enter the bar. With a digital service, all you need to do really is query and say, hey, is this person eligible to enter the bar? Are they 21 years or older? I don't actually need their name, their address, any of the information about them. I just need a yes or no answer. Is this person eligible? And you can enable those much more secure yes, no types of queries, for example, to determine eligibility without getting all that information from the person, without getting it all on paper and sort of opening all of that up to risk. And assuming it's in a secure environment, you can actually validate eligibility much more quickly and much more securely with less data information shared across the different bodies.
Thanks, Olga. We've got a question coming in specifically on grants that I'm going to put to Martin and Ivana in a minute. But Juha, I want to talk to you then about, you've managed to get this collaboration on data sharing between two close neighbours. But when it comes to that data privacy and trust issues, how could you reassure, say, two countries that don't have such close relationships that it's okay to be sharing that level of data? Because some of the data you're talking about is quite sensitive data about individuals or businesses. So what could you tell them about kind of that would reassure them that the technology is in place to keep that data secure?
Yeah, thank you. You are totally correct. It was and it is easy with the Estonian colleagues to share, to trust that our data exchange, that they are safe, they are used in a proper way. That would be, I'm sure, that would be the question if some countries are creating the agreement, considering similar kind of cooperation like we do have. I do not have clear answer, but knowing that even within the Europe, we do have a national laws, national acts different to others, so it's not easy task. We do not have a European wide, we do not have global wide legislation. Sorry, I do not have the better answer, but that is one thing first to consider. First, that is, I would say, even the challenge.
Yeah. So getting the foundations in place, and maybe that includes kind of legal frameworks, would be key. Thanks.
Yeah.
So Ivana and Martin, you're quite welcome to talk about trust as well, but there's a question coming specifically on grant schemes, so I wanted to put it to you. It's from Connor Molfi, and Connor has asked, if you were starting a new grant scheme today, what are the top priorities you would focus on to tackle fraud in an efficient and effective way? So maybe you think you've already achieved this, but if you could start from scratch. Ivana, I'm going to come to you first.
Yes, of course. It's a great question, and I don't think we've achieved it fully. That it's like I said initially, fraud is constantly diversifying, and the one thing that we have to make sure is that there is a sort of countermeasures throughout the life cycle of grant schemes, so that we can feed intelligence back on what is actually slipping through the net, that we're able to pick on and be able to respond to it. But I think one of the very key things to get right up front is to ensure that fraud risk assessments are actually completed with that type of intelligence, to really understand what are the measures and controls that need to be put into place around a grant scheme end to end in its life cycle, in order to prevent as much as possible and actually have planned activities in place that once a horse has bolted and the money is out the door, how we continue to be undertaking effective due diligence in the sort of performance measurement space, and how we at the end evaluate and make sure that we are looking at recovering funds where we have picked up on fraud and errors.
Yeah.
So I think it all really starts at the very heart of doing good fraud risk assessments at the start of a grant scheme, and making sure that you will then have the right controls and processes, and that you're harnessing the tools that are available to help you on that journey.
Thanks, Ivana. So using technology, not just on the prevention side, but also on the kind of monitoring and recovering as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it has to be a continual journey. Yeah. And one of the things that we looked at starting in the due diligence space is due diligence doesn't stop at the start when you're determining whether to award funding or not. It has to be a continuous process. There are changes in circumstances. The better we can spot things, we can respond to them more quickly and effectively.
Yeah, thanks. Martin, do you agree with that? How far away do you think you are from an ideal grant scheme?
I totally agree with Ivana that it's a never-ending progress. And this is a journey that will continue, because what we have seen that the grants and the money as itself, in essence, isn't the thing which is bringing up the best in all of the people. But so, and in addition to the risk analysis, and what I personally do really favor and I like really much is when you set up the grant schemes based on results. So it's not the activities, it's not the costs you're providing the funds with, but you're providing for results. For example, is it for getting certain amount of trainings done? Is it to have some changes done in having like connectivity of either the physics or IT systems, which you can check, and you can also, when you have like the construction grant schemes, then you can have also from the Google map, you can have the visualizations whether actually the construction is going on or not. So having the whole logic change, as Juha also put it before, you have to have the change of the mindset, or have the courage to think differently. It's not that we are funding a 2-year project, but we are actually wanting to have some effect with the grant schemes. And if you have this in mind in the very beginning, then you can design the schemes already so that you are decreasing the number of fraud possibilities already during the activities. Of course, it has to be backed up with interlinkages between different registers, info systems, that you know when some, for example, some permission is granted by the state, or you have the tax or the tax board's info systems connected, so you have the full picture. But when you're designing it into the way that you are getting what you want with the grant scheme, then it's harder also to trick with it.
Yeah, thanks. Lots of questions coming in, so I'm going to maybe take a couple of these. So we've got one from Ruth Kennedy, who has said, are there opportunities to plug into some of the services provided by commercial fintechs to modernize tax administration? So that's one question. And the other one, which maybe is for you, Olga, which is, can you expand, this from Barbara, can you expand on ensuring how the social benefits went to the correct recipients? And how were you able to improve the timeliness of those fundings? So 2 questions there. You can answer either of those. So opportunities to plug into some of the services provided by commercial fintechs, and how can you use technology to ensure social benefits go to the correct recipients? I answer one or either of those. Olga, I'm going to come to you first.
So why don't I take the second one, because I think this was based on my comments. So one, on ensuring the social benefits go to the correct recipients. There's a couple of elements there. One is that you want to make sure the right person is actually signing up for the aid. So for example, in the US and in many other countries, when somebody signs up for unemployment insurance, which we had a huge uptick in during COVID, you want to make sure they are indeed unemployed. That seems pretty basic, but it's actually very hard to do. What does employment mean? If you used to work 40 hours a week and now you work 10 hours a week, are you employed or unemployed? If you lost your job and had to take another one, with half of your old salary, you're employed, but you may need more government support than you used to have. So I think one of the elements there that is really critical is doing those checks to make sure, is this person truly eligible? A lot of programs that are means tested, for example, below a certain level of income, again, is this person making less than $50,000 a year, and are they eligible for extra child benefits? Here I can bring in the example from Brazil that we worked on, which was a means tested program to support low-income children in schools. So schools used to be the place where you would get food for a lot of low-income children in the Brazilian province. And when schools closed, you suddenly had, very little access to that direct food benefit. And the government wanted to make sure they had a very limited amount of money, but they wanted to make sure those children were still fed. So they could actually very quickly see which families were enrolled in those programs to get the food benefit from school. They could distribute a prepaid card that was eligible only for grocery stores or food outlets and restaurants to ensure that that money was going directly to feeding those children and feeding those families at a time when they didn't have another alternative because the schools were closed. So again, you could you could do the means testing, you could control the spend to make sure when you have a limited budget, you have to get it out the door quickly, that it's actually going to supporting the people that were intended to receive that aid. I think there was also a question of speed, how can you do this more quickly? I think a digital payment just is, you can do it today and receive it within 2 to 3 days, as opposed to writing a check. Again, you often have to receive the application, do all the manual reviews, contact, other parts of the government, write the check, cut the check, mail the check. It can take 2 weeks to get there. That child hasn't had food for 2 weeks, right? So actually being able to be faster and more effective in reducing the fraud of the usage of that money can be very helpful.
Thanks, Olga. Just to say to the audience, there's a survey that's just been sent out. It should be in your inboxes. Please do take a few minutes if you can to fill in that, because it just makes sure, it means that we can provide the type of webinars that are most useful for you. So I'll be hugely grateful if you could take a couple of minutes to fill that in after this webinar. I can't believe we're almost out of time as well. So Juha, I'm going to come to you probably on the question of the extent to which there's potential for governments to work more with some of the commercial fintech companies. And is that something that you are thinking about in the area of reducing fraud in the tax area?
Actually, could I reply for social benefit issue?
Yes, sure.
Shortly, because that is close to my official heart. So we created a solution also, as I said, for the anti-misuse of the system. So we are not only tackling serious frauds, we are also tackling the misuse of the social benefits. So my short example is that there could be one Finnish individual in Estonia having salary, also at the same time the Finnish individual having social benefit in Finland. So we can compare with our system in real time and detect and then close the misuse of the system. So that is one point of our real time system. So the people cannot cheat Finnish or Estonian administration anymore. That was my reply for this.
Brilliant. Thanks, Juha. Martin, I'm going to come to you. You can answer then either on the how do you improve the kind of targeting of social benefit, or if you want to talk about kind of greater collaboration with some of the commercial fintech organizations.
Maybe I would choose the social ones because with the fintechs, it's the question maybe more on the tax side, not even for the grants area. Maybe one thought to give here that about the setting out the prerequisite, the rules is that as a government office and being in state service center, the central accountant responsibility in Estonia is that we have set rules that we accept only electronical invoices. So only e-invoices are accepted when writing invoice to public sector. So it took us 1.5 years in order to implement it. We had this at first declaration of it, then we had this time to implement it and the companies to get used to it. But now, as it's all electronical and we can see the invoices, we can see the beneficiaries, so it adds up really much to the quality of the data and also seeing the full picture of the beneficiaries. Mm-hmm. So maybe this is the set of how the government can nudge a little bit on the technology going further on, which is both on, and it's not only the anti-fraud, but it's also pure efficiency deal. So no more paper bills and no more archived documents for 5 or 7 years.
You can get that whole picture and much more quickly.
Yes, and having it done there.
Brilliant.
And about the social benefits, I would say that this is the high quality interlinkage between the systems, and the decision that our government has done is that you only enter the data as a private human in one time into government system, and then the government has to find the ways to use it, the data. Yeah. So it's both ways. It's of course it's really high demand on keeping the data privacy, but on the other hand, it also gives the private sector opportunities to really use the data. So it's both ways. It's more convenient for the private persons, but also gives opportunities for the public sector to use the data.
Ivana, we started with you. I'm going to finish with you. Your thoughts either on targeting this, social benefit issue, or the potential for working with some of the commercial fintech organizations. Over to you.
Well, I'd like to end on the opportunity, perhaps, because I do think that there is lots and lots of opportunity out there. I think where we have started on our journey exploring how we can better due diligence around grants, actually even during the pandemic, as I think Olga was saying at the start, for some of the PPE supplier checks, we soon found that the tool is very transferable in supporting sort of procurement activities. And I think that there is lots of work being done in the commercial space. I know that the grants function is looking to work much more closely with both the commercial function and the finance function. And I think that there is plenty of opportunity there for us to join forces much more better with sort of financial services. I know from our own hackathon, most people didn't really know what grants were from financial services until they had the opportunity to speak to us. And the appetite for partnering and sort of helping us on this journey was just overwhelming. And I think that extends to our commercial colleagues and further, and the opportunities are just there in front of us.
Fantastic, thank you. And we've had the great examples from MasterCard of how they've worked with governments as well. So we've had those real world examples as well. I'm afraid our time is up. Can't believe how quickly that conversation has gone. I would just like to say a huge thank you to the audience for sending in so many questions. I'm sorry we didn't get through absolutely all of them, but I think we will be able to answer any that we didn't answer now behind the scenes. So you should all get some kind of answer to your question in due course. We have actually recorded today's session, so just say you will be sent a link as well of this video, which you can watch all over again if you want, or you can share it with your colleagues. And there will be an article written as well with all of the key points that came out of this discussion, and that will come round to you in a couple of weeks' time. So it just leaves me to say a very big thanks, final thanks from me to our fantastic audience. So to Martin, to Ivana, to Juha, and to Olga, and to our knowledge partner MasterCard today. Thank you so much for a fantastic conversation, for giving us so much of your time and your expertise. It's been a really interesting and helpful conversation. I hope you've all enjoyed it. Enjoy the rest of the day wherever you are, and I look forward to seeing you all very soon on another Global Government Forum webinar. Thank you, everybody, and goodbye for now.
Thank you.